You made your choice, and I made mine. Ray immediately realized that this was about intervention. What is it? His daughter, Christine, was obviously the spokesperson for the group. We wanted to talk to you about Mom. Ray looked at his wife, but her expression was impassive. He hoped it wasn't what he thought it was. He looked at his daughter again. What about Mom? Mom told us about Luke. She told you, didn't she? Ray asked incredulously. Yes. And about, your problems. Ray just stared at his wife, shocked that she would share such personal information with anyone, let alone their children and grandchildren. My problems, as well as this whole story in general, are none of your concern. But Mom's happiness is our business. Mom's happiness is your business? I suppose that means that my happiness doesn't matter and I have to give up everything I care about? Christine sighed. But Mom has needs, and you can't meet them. If you had needs she couldn't fulfill, do you think she would stop you? For the first time since this whole thing started, Josie flinched and suddenly found a spot on the dinner table that interested her. Doing so, she said, Christine, stop. Everyone looked at her, then at me, and I started laughing. Oh, Christine, I think you just made the biggest mistake ever. Then I asked, would you like to hear an interesting story? Josie stood up and yelled, Ray, don't do that! But I laughed and replied, it's your mess. You deal with it. So, where do I start? Christine, when you were born, your mother gave up on love. For almost 3 years, she couldn't fulfill my needs. She even wrote me a letter about it, which I have right here. Let me quote it. With a theatrical wave of my hand, I pulled the letter from my top pocket. I had kept it in my sock drawer all these years, as I was pleased that I had sacrificed part of my life for my wife's love and happiness. Now I wanted to see my wife squirm at the hypocrisy of her own words, as I quoted directly from her letter. Ray, I know you have needs and I just can't fulfill them right now. It would be so easy for you to go out and find a woman who could do it. But if you did, the pain you would cause me would be immense, and our marriage would not survive. I am asking, no, begging, please don't go outside of our marriage. I need you to put your needs aside for a while this depression dissipates. I don't know how long it will last, but hopefully soon. Please remain faithful to me as I have been faithful to you if the roles were reversed. So, for almost 3 years, we had no love. At the end of the 3-year period, we made love once, and the result was Leo. It took another 4 years of infrequent lovemaking, meaning once every 2 months, if I was lucky, before our sex life began to return to normal. So, Christine, your mom and I hadn't made love, or made love very infrequently for almost 7 years, and I hadn't looked beyond our marriage. Was I a devoted husband or a deadbeat? The question hung in the air like a bad odor. Josie's face flushed, partly from humiliation, but also from anger. I knew that quoting her own words wouldn't please her because she always thought I should give her more than she gave me. Christine was knocked out, but still pulled herself together. Dad, it was a long time ago, and you may never recover, so Mom may never experience it again. My laughter filled the room. I looked at Eric. I realized that Christine is going through a similar period right now. If I were you, I'd go out and make love to anyone who wants it, because in 20 years she's going to put the horns on you too. Christine blushed and asked, Who told you that? I simply replied, Your mom told me a few weeks ago that you have the same problem she does. I assume you won't mind Eric getting his needs met? While Christine stuttered and simmered with anger, I looked at Rebecca and asked, How's your life? Isn't it time for Leo to get busy getting ready to play on the field when you get a break? A lot of angry faces looked at me, and I smiled, saying, You all seem happy to be the ones being taken care of, but very unhappy to be in my shoes. Christine came up to me and said, This is different. Mom needs this, and you can't do it. Get over it. I looked at all of them. Goodbye. I turned on my heels and headed for the door. Julie and Allison shouted after me. What about the fireworks? There are enough fireworks for tonight, I replied. Go ahead and enjoy them. I suspect my presence will spoil the fun for everyone. I walked to the car and got in. As I backed out of the driveway, Josie stood in the doorway but made no attempt to stop me. For a while, I drove around not knowing what to do. After all, today was the 4th of July and everything was closed. One day, my cell phone rang with Rebecca's number on it. She had left a voicemail saying she was sorry about the ambush and that she and Leo agreed that it was wrong, but Christine had basically forced them to agree with her. About 30 minutes later, I was outside the firm's office, so I drove up, parked, and went inside. If anything, I should have had a cup of real coffee. Josie had put me on decaf, and I hated it. Sitting down at my desk, I decided to write a list of possible options. Without thinking, the first word on the list was divorce. I don't know why, it was just there in front of me. I sat there enjoying my coffee, thinking about that word and realizing that I had no choice if I wanted to be honest with myself. I gave up my needs for her, but when the roles were reversed, she refused. No matter how much she hid, everyone would still find out and I just couldn't live that life. No, it would be a divorce. So what's next? The words "where to live" and "divorce lawyer" appeared on the page like magic. I opened my computer and typed "divorce lawyer" into Google. Page after page of results appeared. At the top of the second page was a name I recognized, Lindsay Logan. She was handling a divorce case for one of my golf buddies, and I knew her in passing from a charitable organization we both supported. She was young, attractive, but that just made meetings easier, and acted like an elephant in a china shop when the situation called for it. I went to her webpage and filled out a form proposing a meeting. An automated response came to my email saying that I would be called back within 24 hours and offered to meet. Now, about where to live. I couldn't live alone. I couldn't cook, clean, or wash my own clothes. But I didn't want to go into a nursing home. As I was thinking about this, a commercial I saw came to mind. It was an advertisement for a nursing home on the far side of town. It housed people who were recently divorced and needed exactly what I needed, a housekeeper. Each person had their own apartment. The front door led out to the parking lot, and the back door led into a space where a small restaurant provided meals, laundry, cleaning and ironing of clothes, and a maid to clean the apartment. After a few Google searches, I had the phone number for this establishment. I called, forgetting what day it was, and was surprised to be answered. It turned out that the manager or assistant manager were on the premises 24/7 and would be happy to show me around any time. I asked if I could come in now and was answered. Sure, why not? The drive from the office to the property took about 45 minutes, mostly due to road closures for the fireworks display. The manager showed me around the property and the apartment that was up for rent. To my surprise, I was familiar with 2 of the tenants and was invited to watch the game with them in the living room. I had a great time with old buddies and a few new ones. I even managed to have a beer. After the game, Sam, who we used to go fishing together before we got married and lost touch, asked me why I was here. My wife decided she wanted a younger model, I replied, and it's hard for her to understand why I'm not happy. Sam looked at me. Josie's always been a selfish fool, but this is colder than I thought. I looked at him in surprise. Did you know her? Sam made a strange face and said, Sure, I was friends with her brother, dated her when we were 12, when 6 weeks was a lifetime, and lived next door until we were 15. I wondered, I didn't know that. When we went fishing, you lived in Hillview. Yeah, Sam replied. My parents moved there just before we met, and then we kinda lost touch when you were dating Josie. I guess she didn't want you around me and kept you away from me. If you remember, you always had weekends where the guys would go out and stuff like that. You lost touch with all the guys. How many of your friends now were your friends before you met Josie? And how many were Josie's friends after you met? It was an interesting question, and I knew the answer immediately. None. It was a shock, but it wasn't. I always did everything I could to make her happy, and if there was a conflict between her happiness and mine, she always won. This Luke thing was just the ultimate display of selfishness. I went to the manager's office and said I would take the apartment. We did the paperwork, and I pulled out my card to put down a deposit. The manager looked at it and said, "I think you should open a new account before you pay me. You don't want your future ex-wife to know where you are, do you?" I didn't even have time to think about banking, phones, etc. He suggested I go to a new bank and open an account tomorrow. He looked at my phone. "Upgrade this brick as well. You'll need a smartphone for banking and social apps." I had a face that made him laugh. "Don't worry. 1 week here and you'll think of your smartphone as an old friend." I drove home to an empty house. The fireworks were already over, and I knew they would dismantle the canopies and get home around 11:30 in the evening. That gave me 45 minutes. Once in the office, I gathered all the financial information that the attorney had requested in the email. I kept everything in folders, so it was easy to copy everything, put it all in the car, and sat down as the others came through the door. Everyone stopped and looked at me like I had just burst balloons. Christine turned around and said, "Everyone go home. Mom and I are going to finish this with Dad." The rest of us couldn't wait to get out of the house, leaving Josie and Christine standing in the doorway looking at me while I sat in my chair and watched them. Josie started by asking me, "Why did you bring up our personal problems?" "They were personal, and this letter was written from the heart. I'm upset that you used it against me." Christine continued, "You ruined a day that was supposed to be perfect with your crap and then ran off like a cranky child." I didn't move or speak, just stared at them. Eventually, Josie yelled out, "Well, then say something, we need an apology, and then I expect you to call Luke and tell him that the body bag phrase was over the top." I started with Josie, and then I announced, "Your affair is over. If he ever shows up in this house again, we're divorced. Now get that excuse-making daughter out of this house before I say something she'll regret." Christine looked at me with disgust in her eyes. "There will be no divorce. So figure out how to deal with your bruised ego, and if I hear you lay a finger on Luke, you will never see your granddaughters again." I stood up and walked over to Christine, intending to intimidate her. It was obvious that the look on my face scared her, as my anger boiled over and she took a couple steps back. Josie stepped between us and said, "Christine, go away and I'll deal with your father." As Christine swiftly left the house, Josie said, "How dare you threaten your daughter like that?" Walking up the stairs, I said, "I'm moving into the spare room. I'm sick of being in the same room with you. Sleeping in the same bed is out of the question." I moved some of my stuff into the spare room and locked the door. Josie used the spare key to unlock it, but I stood at the door and said, "I'm going to push you out of this room if you don't leave. I have no interest in being with you." Her face reflected surprise and shock, but she backed away from the door, which I immediately closed in her face. I slept pretty well, all things considered, and the next morning I was up and out before Josie got up. The first thing I did was go to the office to ask for a few days' vacation. I explained to my supervisor what had happened, and he said it was okay to take a week off without triggering my vacation entitlement. At 9 the next morning, the attorney's office called and set up a time for me to meet at 3:30 in the afternoon. I agreed to that time and then went to the bank to open a new account. The bank employee showed me how the banking app worked, and I verified that it was very simple. Everything was set up to transfer half of the funds to my new account. I then went to the mall and bought a new cell phone and contract. I went back to the bank and they set up the mobile banking app for me. After that, I went to the nursing home and used the banking app to pay the deposit. From there, I went to a furniture store and ordered a new bed, furniture, TV, etc. for my new apartment, asking for them to be delivered to the apartment by Wednesday. At the store next door, I also bought 2 large suitcases. At 3:30, I was sitting outside my future lawyer's office. The receptionist told me to come through, and as I entered her office, I was shocked. I always remembered Lindsay as attractive, but now she was a vision sitting in front of me. She looked up and smiled. "You've changed since the last time we spoke," I said. The smile turned to laughter. I was about 15 years old. I hope I had changed, and hopefully for the better. I just couldn't contain my smile when I said it. "You bet!" She clearly didn't remember me from charity events, to which she must have dressed less than elaborately. After that, the meeting was entirely business. I told her what had happened and gave her all the financial information. The offer was that she would keep the house, half of her savings, and receive spousal support of $500 a month for 2 years. I would keep my pension, and she would have to keep working. The papers were due the following Friday, but I asked that they be served Saturday morning. I returned home at the usual time and ignored Josie. I moved all my things into the spare room and then took the opportunity to pack my new suitcases discreetly for her. The next morning, I carried them to the car and left while she was still up. I left the suitcases in the apartment. I'll unload them when the furniture arrives. All that was left in my old house was a week's worth of clothes and everything dirty. After checking a few things, I headed to the office. The boss asked what I was doing there. Nothing to do, so I might as well get some work done. In fact, I had a very productive day and arrived home about an hour later than usual, grabbing a bite to eat at a health food store near the office. Josie looked at me and said, "I cooked the lamb, but it went bad. Why are you late?" I just looked at her. Never mind," and went to the spare room, locking the door. I heard Josie knock on the door. "We need to talk. We can't go on living like this." I opened the door. "Wow, Sherlock. I can't live with you cheating on me every weekend. Until this is over, nothing is going to change." Her face turned red and she screamed, "You have no respect for my feelings, needs, or happiness. You have to man up and work on this marriage or it will be a thing of the past." I started laughing. "I think you need to look in the mirror and say that because you definitely have no respect for my feelings, needs, or happiness. Now please leave me alone." The rest of the week passed in silence. On Thursday, I went after work to put all my stuff away since new furniture had been brought in. I also went to buy new bedding and other necessities. On Friday, I gathered all my dirty clothes into a bag and took them to the laundry room at the new house. Saturday morning, I got up and packed the last of my clothes and medications into a bag I took with me to the golf outing. Then I went downstairs. Josie was sitting at the table and said, "If the golf doesn't happen because of the rain, don't get home until 10 o'clock so you don't see anything you don't want to." So there you have it. You don't care about my feelings, you're continuing your relationship with this Luke guy, and I have nothing to do with your plans. She looked at me with a sad smile. "You're the most important thing, but you can't take care of that part of my life, so I need someone to help." I stood up. "Okay, you made your choice and I made mine." I headed for the door and she asked, "What? No kiss?" Turning around, I laughed at her. Never again. I drove to Lindsay's office, where I met with her and the bailiff, and drove back to my old house in the bailiff's car. We parked a few houses away from the house and waited. Around 8:30, Luke pulled up to the house. At 8:45, the bailiff came to the door. It was several minutes before Josie answered, and it was clear from her clothes that they had wasted no time. I saw the bailiff turn to her. She nodded. Then he pulled an envelope out of his bag and held it out to her. She refused to accept it. He spoke to her again, and this time she took the envelope. As he left, I saw Josie open the envelope, put her hand over her mouth, and slam the door shut. Less than 5 minutes later, Luke left the house and drove away. The first call was from Christine, and it rang 10 minutes later. I picked up the phone and heard the tirade. "What is this crap? Divorcing my mom for what?" being nice to her. I let Christine speak until there was silence on the phone. I sat for another 30 seconds, then I said, "Are you done?" A new stream of swear words began, which I just let pass my ears. Finally, she stopped and asked, "Well?" My answer, "Well, what?" made her hang up. Lindsay and I finished the final papers so they could be turned over to Josie's attorney. I also gave Lindsay limited power of attorney and the right to represent me in court in case I failed to appear. As I was leaving, I saw Leo parked outside Lindsay's office. He looked at me and said, "We're all looking for your car. I'm here to drive you home so you can get this nonsense over with." I walked past him and headed for my car, but when I reached for the door, he held out his hand, preventing me from opening it. "Get in my car, now!" I didn't move from my seat, but said, "If you don't take your hand away right now." At that moment, Lindsay came up behind Leo and put her hand on his shoulder. "My client wants to leave, and you are preventing him from doing so. If you don't get out of his way, I will make sure that you spend 30 days in the county jail and appear before the judge on the charge of false imprisonment. And you won't like it because you are too beautiful to spend 30 days in the county jail." Leo's hand jerked lightning fast from the car door, and I opened the door to get in. When I had one foot in the car, Leo said, "This isn't over, Dad. You're not divorcing Mom and moving out of the house." With those words, he walked to his car. Lindsay looked at me. "I suspect this is going to be messy," and walked back to the office. I got in my car and drove to my apartment, making sure I parked my car so it wouldn't be visible from the road. I met with my housekeeper on Sunday, and we discussed my medications, diet, and other things related to my heart condition. They had a system in place to make sure all medications were taken and all meals met dietary needs. It all blew up on Monday afternoon. Lindsay called me and told me that Josie had appointed an attorney, and the first thing they did was issue a protective order, stating that I was unable to care for myself and asking the court to put me in Josie and Kristen's custody because of the need to monitor my heart condition. The preliminary hearing was set for 10 the next morning. Lindsay asked for my doctor's and facility manager's information so she could prepare a defense. At 10 in the morning, the hearing was scheduled, and Josie's attorney stood up, stating that I was incapable of taking care of myself, that Josie had complete control over my medical condition, and I should be placed in her custody. Josie was called to testify and gave a very one-sided opinion of my inability to do anything for myself. Things went south when Lindsay asked her what she would do about the divorce petition if the decree was granted, to which Josie replied, "Revoke it, of course." Lindsay then turned to the judge and said, "Your Honor, this is an attempt to stop the divorce. It has nothing to do with my client's well-being," and sat back down. Lindsay then called the facility manager, who explained that it was a nursing home and they had a system in place to ensure that medications were taken and dietary requirements were met. She then called my doctor to the stand, who had visited the facility to review the process and said it was as good as anything he had seen and had no problems. The judge looked at Josie's attorney and called him to the stand. After a heated discussion, the judge said, "I will not grant this order, as it is obvious that the medical evidence is contrived, and the real reason is to try to stop the divorce. All dismissed." After we left, the doctor turned to me and said, "Call me. I've looked at your medication charts, and I think we need to review them." Christine stayed behind Lindsay, and as the doctor left, she said, "Dad, this isn't over. You have to get over your ego and get back to Mom, or she will get mad at you and actually sign those papers." I laughed. "Oh, please let her do it and hurry up." The next day, I was sitting in the doctor's office, and he said, "I noticed that you are still taking a very high dose of ACE, which is causing your blood pressure to be too low. I think we need to take you off of it altogether. At your last checkup, your blood pressure was indeed too low. Starting today, I want the dose reduced by 10 milligrams a week. I will send a letter to Mrs. Davidson at your new address. Over the next 2 months, the dose of blood pressure medication was reduced to 0. About 2 weeks after the last appointment, Sam and I were sitting watching TV when the manager brought in a woman who wanted to rent one of the apartments. I found her immediately attractive, and the slight arousal was a strange, disconcerting, but very pleasant sensation. It was something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. The first hearing on the divorce petition eventually took place after Josie had put up every possible obstacle. Lindsay presented the petition as a simple, irreconcilable divorce and asked that it be granted without delay. Josie's attorney came forward and said that the reason for the divorce was a misunderstanding on my part and asked that 12 counseling sessions be scheduled, which was the maximum in our state, so that we could work out the issues and find a way to move forward. The judge looked at Lindsay and said, "Your client has been married for a long time. I think they should see if anything can be salvaged." Then, addressing the court as a whole, he said, "I am scheduling 3 counseling sessions, after which the counselor must report back to me on progress. The counselor must be agreed between the parties." The decision about the counselor was traumatic. Josie's first suggestion was to use one of her friends from the golf club. This suggestion was immediately rejected, and we eventually settled on a counselor who Lindsay knew was impartial. The first session went badly from the start. Josie began by saying that she had needs and that it was unreasonable of me to prevent them from being met. When I explained that adultery was involved, she became furious, saying that it was a simple need and that I was not up to the job, and how could I expect her to remain faithful under those circumstances? When I produced her letter, which she tried to snatch from the counselor, saying it was irrelevant, the counselor lashed out at her, stating that she clearly did not see marriage as equal. The second session was even worse, as Christine stormed in mid-session and demanded that the counselor tell me to stop being selfish and tell the judge to stop the divorce. After the second session, the counselor wrote a letter to the judge and said there was no point in continuing because there was no prospect of saving the marriage. Over the next 3 months, Josie's attorney used every procedural tool to delay the divorce, asking for medical and psychiatric evaluations, claiming that I was mentally unstable and that my medications made it impossible for me to make rational decisions. The final Hail Mary came 2 days before the final hearing. I was found capable of making independent decisions, and Lindsay filed a motion with the court to make that hearing final, a motion that probably should have been granted. In the evening after dinner, I sat in the living room and talked with Angela, the new tenant whose presence had caused me to stir. We had become friends, and the mutual attraction grew with the excitement in me. I spoke to the doctor again, who explained that my ACE dose was too high and I literally couldn't pump blood to my extremities. It turned out that Josie had demanded that the medication be kept high, believing it would be better for my health. While we were talking, 2 police officers and an elegantly dressed man came up and asked who I was. When I gave my name, the man handed me an envelope stating that my children had been granted temporary rights under an indefinite power of attorney, and I was to be placed in protective custody until a full hearing. As I was being physically escorted out of the building, I yelled to Angela to call Lindsay Logan, my attorney, and ask her to find me. I was taken to a local hospital where I was placed on a bed in a secure ward. About 2 hours later, I heard Lindsay at the counter, but she was told that the attorney's POA, a legal authorization that gives an agent or trustee the authority to act on behalf of a person called a fiduciary, had instructed that she was not allowed to see me. At 9 the next morning, Lindsay and the bailiff entered my room, and the nurse following them said, "You can't come in here." The bailiff turned around and handed her a piece of paper that said, "This is a power of attorney that says we have the right. If you obstruct me, I, as a representative of the court, can use any means necessary to gain access. And believe me, after what happened to him last night, I will not be gentle with you." The nurse quickly stepped aside, and Lindsay walked over to me with the words, "Get up quickly and get out of here. They're going to try to stop this." The bailiff unlocked the handcuffs, and we literally ran out of the hospital and into a cab. Lindsay drove me to her house, and sat me down over a cup of coffee to explain everything. At the time of my heart attack, I had signed a power of attorney for my children. This gave them the right to make decisions about my medical care and finances in the event I became incapacitated. Yesterday, they activated it, declaring me mentally incompetent and admitted me to the hospital. They have a hearing scheduled for 10 o'clock this morning, and if they succeed in keeping me out of it, they will gain control of me and all my legal affairs. Lindsay's plan was for me to be present in court, but since the kids had informed the police that I was a danger to myself and others, we had to be careful. We left Lindsay's house at 9:45 and took a cab to the courthouse, entering through the back door. At 10 o'clock, the court hearing was announced, and as Lindsay entered the court and took a seat at the table for my defense, Christine's attorney objected, saying that she had been removed from the case under the POA and could not represent me. Lindsay stood up and said, "Please ask Mr. Mulholland yourself," and called on me. The kids jumped up, but the judge told them to sit down. I had a right to be here. Then the judge looked at me. "You are not infirm. Why was this case brought?" Lindsay stood up and said, "My client is in the process of divorcing his wife, and this is a brazen attempt to prevent him from doing so." The judge looked at his papers. "Why is there no mention of divorce in these papers? This is a clear abuse of the POA. I am dismissing this case." "Ms. Logan, when is the divorce hearing?" "In about an hour," she replied. The judge looked at the children's attorney and said, "If there are any objections to the divorce decree, both of your clients will go to the district court for 21 days. The divorce went smoothly, and 3 months later I was a single man. What happened to Angela? Well, the night the divorce judgment was entered, we had a party, and while we were dancing, things started to work. Before either of us realized what was going on, we were in bed and cemented our friendship. We don't chase it like rabbits, but once a week for a heart attack victim makes us both happy. The end.